So you're back again with the Looking Glass Forum, and we are unveiling the occult design that works against the civil liberties, Protestant freedoms established and protected by this constitutional republic here in America. Remember, the lies are many, but the truth is one.
We have to begin part 2 of the episode, how the Vatican created Islam. And of course, the Vatican itself wasn't officially created until I think it was 1922. I'll have to go back and check in that name. But we understand the Vatican to be the Roman Catholic power surrounding the papacy. So that's shouldn't be the central part of Roman Christianity, but all the power and authority and ecclesiastical, temporal authority, if you will, spiritual and actually temporal power on earth have been tied up into the hands of the Pope. So the Pope can make grand distinction within doctrine, can decide whether someone is canonized into heaven or cast into hell after they're dead, can use his pretended ministry to absolve sins, and then he gives this authority to all of his priests, who we call father. And that's what the word papacy means. It means the father, the Pope, and they call him Holy Father. So this individual who's elected by the Curia, or really the old College of Cardinals is really the old Senate of Rome, and that election, that democratic pick of a pope, then seats the Vicar of Christ, who is the highest bishop of the earth. All the other bishops of the earth have to submit and kiss the ring of the Pope, and whatever he decides, everyone has to go with. It's a spiritual dictatorship, if you will. And that power was greatly diminished by Napoleon in 1799, but of course by 1933, the papacy was receiving, through Benito Mussolini and through others, would receive his temporal power back as an authority, as the king of the Vatican city-state and the ruler of Rome and the head of Roman Christian religion. It's really different than Protestant religion. The Roman Church considers us to have a paper pope. In other words, instead of a leading man, a living man who breathes with flesh and blood to rule over us, we don't have an individual person, but our authority stops with the Word of God in the Bible. So they try to find controversy there. They try to unwind the authenticity and the authority of the Bible, and they do it by creating other translations. You have the NIV, the New World Translation, and the Douay-Rheims, which is a completely perverse book, and it's different than the King James Version, which used the old Greek translations and translated them into English directly without any subversion or manipulation of the details within the Word of God in order to propagate a certain particular doctrinal issue or whatever. Within the Douay-Rheims, the Catholic Bible, it has Mary depicted in the Proto-Evangelicon, which is the very beginning introduction of the gospel. We see that Mary is the one who crushes the head of the serpent and plays this role as a mediatrix and a part of the divinity, and she plays a role in the salvation of mankind. And they develop prayers and incantations directed towards Mary, which they consider to be beneficial, so that you would pray to Mary now and at the hour of our death, for instance. I mean, she plays a part in the Godhood. So not only is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in Catholicism, Mary is the Mother of God, and there's this convoluted sense that they're bringing back Semiramis or Ostara. They're bringing back one of the goddesses of ancient mythology and making that deity, that female deity, using the old statues and the old idols of Rome that go back to Babylon when they had the Queen of Heaven and they worshipped her. And so Mary takes the place of this older iconic deity within pagan religio-cultic symbolism. So Rome had always had these pictures of these statues and idols of different female deities and idols around Rome. The Romans would pray to these idols. Diana, Zeus always had his consort, his female consort goddess in the mythology. So these stone idols would now be superimposed with this identity of Mary. Mary. So now Mary is this figure, and it's holy and devout to pray to her. It's pious to pray to Mary. That's what Catholicism is all about. And of course, we see that in Islam as well. In Islam, women don't play a very important part, except for Mary. It's highly exalted, I think 8 different times within the Quran and the Surahs and different scriptures of Islam. Mary is raised to the status as being a most important figure within religion, even maybe more important than Jesus Christ within Islam. So you have Muhammad, and then you have Mary, who's a hugely important part within Islam, and then you have Jesus as a kind of a minor prophet who doesn't play an important part. So you can see that the original precursor ideology, the original foundation of knowledge that led to the writing of the Quran and the writing of Muhammad's doctrines were coming from people who could read and write. Apparently Muhammad was illiterate, and it was coming from people who understood Mary to be a significant individual within religion. So it really goes back to our understanding that the old pagan system of syncretism, of heathen religion, had always been there, instituted within Rome, and they cobbled together astrotheology and the different forms of pagan ritual, and they cobbled it together to unite it with these ideas of Christianity. Didn't have idols or rituals, but they just focused on the life and the ministry of Jesus Christ and the life-changing power that brings into an individual's life. Obviously, rituals and annual incantations and burning candles and saying repetitive prayers over and over and over again will not give you any power with God. You just need to read the Bible and to understand that the Lord is looking for an honest relationship from the heart, not for religious works. So we have to go back to the heart of Islam. This is 610, 620 AD, 7th century. And we have to understand what was happening at the time of when Muhammad would rise up and Islam would begin to come onto the scene. And it was instantly imbued with power, with military strength, with financing, with literature, and the support of the Augustinian monks in the region, like we were discussing in the previous part 1. Khadija was Muhammad's wife. I think he was 21 and she was 40, according to history. And she was a Roman Catholic, almost like a nun who lived in a monastery. She had great wealth. And it was through this relationship that Muhammad would tacitly create an Arabic form of Roman Catholicism with a central city in Mecca, a scriptural, a doctrinal move towards religious war, which is the same thing that the Roman Catholics would do. They would have an empire-building strategy of going to war with other Christian churches or other nations that didn't accept their particular form of religion, which is really always the deal with Rome. Even ancient imperial Rome would go and conquer other people and do their rituals before battle, and they had the lightning of Zeus on their shields, and they had this worship of the deities, the stars, they're the planets. You can see that on their armor and their spears and their equipment, that they were there to conquer you with their religion and with their army and their legion. And so it wasn't any different. Later on, nothing had really changed after Constantine. Nothing substantively or fundamentally changed within Roman empire building, within Roman imperialism. And the truth is that the veneer of Christianity was really just a facade. So ultimately, they would use the statue of Jupiter, the old deity of Jupiter that the Romans worshipped, and they would stick that up in the Vatican, and they would call it St. Peter. Everybody worships Jupiter under the name of St. Peter. Same thing with the statuary of Isis in Rome. They would set that up to be the image of Mary, and people would worship that. So they were worshiping Semiramis or Isis in the name of Mary. So it's all a big lie. It's all a big deception. And all along, the annual ritual making of Roman priestcraft was interested in surviving, continuing on, and the rise of the new Christian cult, all about the self-sacrifice of Jesus Christ to save humanity and his resurrection 3 days later. Those stories out of Judea were also subsumed in 300 AD by Constantine, who was there really just to make sure that their cult and their religious system of ritualism within Rome would never end, and it would be absorbed into this new Christian religious system and maintain all of its. Of course, the Roman system maintained all of its holy days, its Easter, its Christmas. These are all Saturnalia practices that go back many centuries before the time of Christ, and they would continue on many centuries after the time of Christ. But they were just doing it in the name of Christ. That's how we're arriving at this idea, this picture of Antichrist. Because Antichrist, the central word is Christ, but of course it's the antithesis of Christ, it's the opposite of Christ, even though it's using the imagery and the words and the supposed pictures and stories of Christ. They're really just They're really just lies. They're really not accurate, and they're really not the true substance of what Christ taught. They're not the true holidays that Christ celebrated. Christmas and Easter have nothing to do with the actual person of Jesus Christ himself. So that's where we're getting into this subject matter. It really has to go back to do with the delusion that people are under, the continued humiliating deception of believing in an enormous religious system of deception. So we're going to go back here and look a little bit more at Muhammad, and to discuss how the monks of the St. Augustinian monks of that period were in the area, building, having a great deal of influence, and they would use this situation with Muhammad as it came about to their advantage, and they would propagate and help to introduce and then literally invent out of whole cloth this system of religion called Islam.
In order to get into the deeper discussion about how this monolithic religious conquest took place across the Arabian Peninsula, we have to really get into a discussion about ancient philosophy and pagan occult practices that are fairly prehistoric. So we're going to go back in time here. We're going to listen to an interesting clip here by Professor Walter J. Veith. And Veith is Veith. He has a lot of interesting things to say about the scope and the landscape of the ancient world. And we're looking at how Islam had its foundation, where the roots of its ideological formation are going to take place. And it's in a world where the Rome has a lot of control over religion and politics, over the geopolitical situation. And this is in the 7th century. So in a lot of ways, Islam is going to come out and try to establish itself as the antithesis of Roman religion. And so it has to have a lot of the empire-building mechanisms that we see in the Babylonian-based system of religion coming out of Rome. And we're going to see that Islam itself has a lot of ancient prehistoric Babylonian roots as well. So let's listen to this clip here by Walter Veith.
The symbol of Catholicism is the moon and the star, hidden, of course, in many other symbols as well. Now, this ancient religion existed before Islam, and the initiates of this religion, as we saw in Morals and Dogma, were the insiders, like Origen, for example, and the Bishop of Alexandria. These were the initiates who harbored the ancient religion. And they were Christian, so-called, but of course they were not Christian. They just propagated that for the Goyim, Catholicism. True Christianity, they fought tooth and nail and tried to eradicate, and they tried to eradicate the Word of God, as we saw, by changing it. Now, Islam arrives on the scene way after that. So the true harborers were in Christianity before they were in Islam, and they were in two places, Alexandria and Rome. Alexandria was eventually taken over by Christianity, and the bastion, the great library, was destroyed, and the final seat of the occult knowledge was in Rome. So Rome is the seat of the ancient occult knowledge before Islam even appeared on the scene. That is the fact. And this ancient occultism had a potent enemy. Who was that enemy? Christianity. Christianity was growing in the place where the disciples had taught it. Christianity was growing in the heartland of the Middle East, Asia Minor, all the way up to India, the Bible says, into the north of Africa. That is where true Christian doctrine prevailed. They kept the Sabbath. Only Alexandria and Rome did not keep the Sabbath. Alexandria soon disappeared as a seat, and then the Sabbath was not kept in Rome. Very interesting history. So the symbol that Catholicism uses is the star and the sickle moon, and this star, by the way, is exactly the same star as is used in Islam. Isn't that interesting? I wonder who gave rise to whom. Obviously, the one who is first can only give rise to the one who comes second, and not the one second give rise to the one who comes first. Isn't that correct? We think about it. So, in Catholicism, we find the half moon or the sickle moon with the deities in them. We find Mary replacing Jesus Christ as the mediatrix of all graces. The mediator, the sole mediator and advocate, is replaced by Mary. So here in this Roman Catholic monastery, Christ puts the crown of thorns onto Mary, and she has the holes in her hand. Mary is always depicted as coming out of a cave. Now, the ancient deities always came out of a cave. Loyola, the Jesuit, received all his information in a cave, and it is interesting that Muhammad received all of his information in a cave. That's paganism. That has nothing to do with Christianity. And there is the monastery high up on a hill. Now, whenever I find a monastery high up on a hill, I'm very interested, because high hills were pagan high places where they sacrificed to pagan deities. It is interesting that all the cathedrals in the world are built on pagan places of worship. Even the Vatican is built on a pagan site of worship. Nothing has changed. So when I came to this particular place in the Middle East, I went to look for the ancient place of worship, and sure enough, on the hill, there it is, the triple arches of the ancient deity of sacrifice in the cave, as per usual. It's interesting that Mary always appears in the cave. In Fatima, she's in the cave. In Lourdes, she's in the cave. The Pope is always visiting the cave and worshipping in the cave. As Osiris represented the sun in Egyptian law, Isis represented the moon, but the truth is that Osiris represented the male active generative powers of nature, while Isis represented the female passive or prolific powers. That's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. So it's actually a form of nature worship. These people would do well in the Bohemian Grove, worshipping the trees. The Templar revelation identifies Isis as the Black Madonna on no less authority than a former head of the Priory of Zion. The Black Madonna cult is century to the Priory of Zion. To them, at least, there is no doubt about the significance of the Black Madonna. You see, Osiris was both black and he was white. And he's worshipped as black and he is worshipped as white. Mary is worshipped as a Black Madonna and as a White Madonna. So we have all these interesting nuances. The Hittites used the symbol of the half moon and the solar deity. This symbol today, of course, is used by none other than the United Nations.
As we kind of examine the interesting comments by Walter Veith, we have to be aware now that there's another player, a secret player in the equation here, and he was making references to Freemasonry. And in order to understand the interplay between the ancient pagan mystery religions and their syncretistic efforts to run and control all the different religious doctrines and dogmas around the world, and virtually unite them together. And so that's what you'll see today in the United Nations, is an effort to unite all world religions. So you'll have people, Aboriginal tribesmen, with Hindus, with Buddhists, with Muslims, and everyone's supposed to tip their hats to the idea that they're all on the same path to the divine godhood or what have you. And really it singles out Protestant Bible-believing Christians as the anomaly and tries to pit the system of world religion against the faith that Bible believers have in Jesus Christ. So we're really seeing an effort to put together a single universal system of religion. And that's what you'll see in between the different monolithic stones of religion is the mortar or the mud of Freemasonry, trying to connect them together. So in the lodge, we'll discuss this later, you'll have the divine lights of the lodge that are inside the Freemason temple within their lodge, and they have an altar, and there's 3 books on the altar, and one of them is the Kabbalah, the Jewish scriptures, and then you'll have a King James Bible, and then you'll have a Quran, and these are the 3 lights of the lodge. And so these are the 3 different religious systems that they intend to virtually knit together. So, and you'll see that in the United Nations, an effort to bring together all religious systems into a single unified ritual. And as you know, people who are Bible believers who hold on to the faith of Jesus Christ, of his life, his death, and his resurrection in 3 days, that system of belief is at odds with the rest of the world. So it doesn't work together. It doesn't link together with Islam. It doesn't link together with Roman religion. It doesn't link together with Hinduism or Buddhism. The call of Jesus Christ is a call to depart from the world, to leave everything else behind, to leave the world behind and follow him. And his system of belief is at odds with the system in the world. So that's what, if you look in the scriptures, it said, if you love the world, then the love of the Father is not in you. So you have to, on some level, have to depart from the world system, the world's cult system of religion, its paganism, its mystery religions, its system of astrological worship, as far as the stars and the horoscopes, astrotheology, where you have the Greeks and the Romans worshiping the sun. That system of ignorant superstition has to be left behind when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. So a lot of people, they can't do that. They find themselves, maybe they think that Hinduism is really exotic and attractive, or they find themselves trying to meditate like a Buddhist, or they try to glom on to Islamic practices in some effort to find some kind of spiritual center or some kind of enlightenment or ability to express religious belief. They reject the idea that Jesus Christ could be born from a virgin, could be the Son of God, could be the Savior of the world. And for me, it's obvious that Yeshua, that Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world, that Islam is a false religion, that Roman churchianity is a false religion, that Hinduism, Buddhism, all of the other systems of world religion, and Freemasonry is a secret system that tries to interlock and to universalize all religious systems, also a pathway to darkness and destruction. And when I look at the words of Jesus Christ and his teachings, I hear the words of the Creator, and I see the light of life. And so this whole discussion is a way for us to understand what has happened in prehistory, in the ancient, in antiquity, that leads us to this point where we don't know where the source of religious dogma begins. So people are expected to just accept that Santa Claus has reindeer, and one of them has a bright shiny nose, and he comes down your kid's presents, or he comes down the chimney and gives your kids presents. And this is the kind of silliness and the superstitious ignorance that comes to us from the medieval era, from past ages, and really insults our Enlightenment thinking. And we have an era of intellectual development here in our modern era. And we know that there are no elves, there's no North Pole, there's no Santa, and really Jesus Christ of the Bible has no connection with December 25th or the Christmas practice. It's paganism, it's irreligious, and people are practicing it out of custom. It's customary. They're practicing it out of basically being blind followers of a world system. Hallmark cards come out, people put up the Christmas decorations, you deck the halls with boughs of holly, and all of a sudden everyone participates. So it's very lit up with, at midnight, it's very lit up with false lights, colorful lights that are just electric lights. So that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a frivolous and empty occult tradition of giving people candy and presents, which is really Baal worship. So when you worship the Mass, the Midnight Mass on the 25th of December, on the darkest night of the year, it's a high occult black Mass that has been worshipped since the time of Egypt and Babylon. And you're participating in it under the guise of being a Christian. So that's why you'll find that your life is empty and you have no inspiration, you have no connection with the Holy Spirit, if you will. You're not connected with the God of the Bible because you're doing specifically those practices which he admonished that you should never do. And you're doing things that Jesus Christ never did. And you're practicing things that he was against. So we have to understand that our discussion really takes us into an area of revelation where we need to see the reality of our history, we see the basis of truth behind what our practices are. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here, the connection with Mary that connects Roman religion with Islam. And in Rome and Roman religion, the Pope has lifted Mary up to be a deity. She is worthy of worship and prayer, and she takes a more central stage, a more central position within Roman dogma than we find in the Bible. In the biblical texts for Protestant Christians, Mary doesn't have a significant role. She was a woman who was the mother of Jesus Christ. She was called blessed among women, but she was also considered to be
a mortal. She was not someone who was born of a virgin birth, as the Gnostics at the Vatican try to weave that little storyline in after the fact. She was a regular mortal woman, and she was Jesus' mother, and he loved her very much. But beyond that, she's not within our religious practice a deity. She's not within our, understanding of the scope of belief, someone that we should be praying to. And Jesus Christ referred to her as woman. And that was not a way to bring her down, but it was a way to put her in her place so that people wouldn't ascribe deity to her after the fact. The reason why Rome finds this necessary to do that is that before the time of Jesus Christ, before the time of, when Julius Caesar broke the Republic and became the dictator and the imperator of Rome, before that era, Rome had many female deities. They had Isis. They had all kinds of different statuary all around Rome where female deities were worshipped. Goddesses. Goddess worship. This is what was taking place in Rome for 1,000 years. So a lot of these statuaries, a lot of these cults to Semiramis or to Astaroth or Isis, as we said, or Ishtar, these are all different vernacular for the same female deity. They were worshipped in Rome, in temples to these goddesses. And after the time of Christ, people simply superimposed Mary's identity onto these statues. So a lot of these statues in Rome that we see that we're calling Mary were really earlier idols of Semiramis or Ishtar or Ashtaroth. That's where we get our word Easter. As when people practice Easter, it's really Ishtar. It's the worship of Isis, the female goddess. And that's why you have the eggs and the different fertility symbols within Easter, which are not Christian. And if you look at the legend and the mythology around Isis, Semiramis, how she came to earth in an egg, it's a lot of mythology, ancient Babylonian mythology about how that goddess came to earth, and we practice that still today. Those are carried about into our modern customs, and those traditions are kept alive in Rome and by those holders of Freemasonry who have the ancient knowledge. And like what Walter Veith was talking about, we're really the goyim. We're really just the public masses who have no knowledge. We're the ignorant outsiders who are not part of their practices, and we just get whatever they put on the holiday cards or whatever Easter egg traditions. Those are the elements that we receive as religious practice. And since, as we're informing you today, most people are uninformed about these things, we have to go to a great extent to reveal to you the traditions and the background customs that make up your religious practice today. So if you're really serious about having a connection with the God of the Bible and worshiping Jesus Christ in truth and in spirit, you have to know what you're doing. Why are you painting those eggs? Why are you bringing a Christmas tree into your house when there are practices that are satanic? They're Babylonian. They're Baal worship. So why would you do those things if you're trying to ascribe your worship and your practice and your prayers towards Jesus Christ? You understand? So that's the compromise that you're in. That's the great controversy that we're dealing with here, is that you're practicing false satanic Babylonian customs in place of worshiping Jesus Christ. And so by doing this, you're insulting God. So it's to your advantage to have this knowledge and to recognize that, okay, I probably shouldn't have my little kids sitting up on Santa's knee. It's kind of perverted. If you think about it, it's pretty perverted to have your children sitting up on some old man's knee, whispering, what Christmas presents they want to some fake Santa. And then later on, when your kids don't know God and they treat you like you're a liar, you taught them false religion. You taught them Santa Claus. Okay, most people, if you look at a lot of Jewish families, a lot of Muslim families, they're not going to teach their kids that. So it's really ignorant for you to do and think it's cute and take pictures. You're empowering a system of spiritual darkness, and you're funding it with your money, and you're putting a satanic tree in your house every year on Satan's high black mass. And this was a time when they would sacrifice children in Babylon to bring about the rebirth of the sun god. So it's strange for you to put your children into this religious mix in the first place. These practices don't have anything to do with children. Like we said before, the age of accountability within the Jewish tradition is 13. Your kids shouldn't be inculcated with religion until they're older. Okay, you shouldn't have your 2 and 3 and 4 year old opening presents from Santa. Okay, if you do that,
you're just really a Satanist. And it's humorous because I think that those who are initiated into this system of revelation and wisdom and ancient wisdom know that you're not practicing Christianity. They've taught you a false system, and you and your parents and your grandparents have been practicing a false system. That's what they're doing in Rome, and ultimately that's what they're doing with Islam as well. So I want to get into it just a little bit more here. We have an interesting take here by Mike Hogard, and he's just really an internet guy that you can see. He's like a pretty mainline Baptist preacher, and he has some interesting things to say about Islam and Freemasonry and the occult, which, you know, typically his other speeches aren't really that interesting, but this one goes to the point of our subject matter here. So let's give him a listen.
The whole idea behind using symbols is that you can, and some people say, well, you know, symbol means whatever you want it to mean. That's the point. That's the point of using a symbol. I think it was Albert Pike said Morals and Dogma. He said we use symbols and we tell all the little guys down here what it means, but we're not really telling the truth. All of us big dogs at the top, and Albert Pike was pretty big, it's kind of like me, he said, now we know the real meaning of it. And I suspect that Albert Pike didn't know what it is that you and I know, because Albert Pike didn't really believe that the Bible was the inerrant, infallible, and only Word of God. He believed it was like a mystery book with all these other mystery books in it. I think I'm going to tell the world what's going on. Let's reveal a mystery. Let's reveal a secret. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And then he said in verse 9, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Now that is a sort of a basis for Bible typology. Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. And he's reiterating the wisdom that came out of Solomon, the preacher, in the book of Ecclesiastes. So he says, there really is no such thing as a new religion or a unique religion. They all teach or all point to the same God. Pastor Mike, you're not saying that, are you? Yeah, I am. There's one exception, and that is true Bible Christianity. Does not point to the same God. But Buddhism, Catholicism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnessism, Sufism, you name it, they all point to New Ageism, they all point to the same God, which is Lucifer, including the religion of Islam. And Islam was always it was a mystery. I couldn't figure it out. You know, they have this Quran. Why is it wrong to burn the Quran and it's okay to burn the Bible? The guy he was interviewing said this. He said, well, even all the Christians know that God didn't write the Bible. Men wrote the Bible, and all the Christians, they don't have a problem with that. Well, let's say most of the Christians don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with that. But anyway, he said everybody knows that God did not write the Bible. Only men wrote the Bible, and yet Muslims believe that God wrote the Quran. Therefore, it is sacred and holy, and it would be a terrible thing to do that. You see how topsy-turvy this world is. But anyway, the religion of Islam, I didn't get. I kept thinking, what you go to the Muslim worship place and you learn how to blow up buildings and kill people. Is that what your religion is? Oh no, it's a religion of peace. No, not really, not really. And so I didn't understand it, and I wasn't about to sit down and learn Aramaic and then read the Quran from front to back and study the life of the Prophet Muhammad. I wasn't going to do that. To me, I like for things to be simple. Islam is not a unique religion. We're going to focus not on all the general teachings of Islam and this and that and the other. We're going to focus on what it is that they focus on. 5 times a day. 5. I want you to think about that. 5 times a day, every Muslim in the world puts their focus toward one thing. It's a city called Mecca. But it's not just the city of Mecca. It's what is the central part of Mecca. That's where they're all pointed toward. All the Muslims in the world are facing and leading in the direction of this one God. And we're going to understand that. We're going to understand the mystery of Mecca. What is it that is so secretive and so powerful there that these people, by duty, by religious ritual, their claim to salvation is based upon this. 5 times a day, they must stop, drop, and roll and pray toward Mecca. What is it that they're praying to, and why is this so powerful amongst them? We're gonna show you the mystery. And I know I'm probably going back over some information that we have shared, but I'm bringing it in sort of a new light and pointing it in a new direction so that we could understand exactly what it is that's being kept secret from, let's say, over 1 billion Muslims in this world. What is it that's being hidden? What is it that she doesn't want everybody to know? And yet, when you understand the language of symbols, and when you understand that this Bible has the answer to everything, then we don't have to study all the in-depth ideas of Islam and all the branches and all that. We don't have to do that. We understand from the Bible exactly what's going on. Mystery Babylon is keeping the secret of the mystery of iniquity. She is the one that is covering and veiling everything and not wanting anyone to discover or find it out. Because, stop and think about it. We understand that Roman Catholicism, they don't really worship the real Jesus Christ. How do we know? Because he's a statue to them. And so he is the idol, I-D-O-L, shepherd in Roman Catholicism. So if they're not worshiping the real Jesus, then they're worshiping the fake Jesus, another Jesus that Paul warned about, Antichrist that John said. It wouldn't sit well for 1 billion Roman Catholics in this world to have revealed to them that they're not worshiping the right Jesus. Roman Catholicism's power base is the fact that the priesthood only has the right to A, interpret the Bible, B, even in some cases read the Bible. They tolerate translations of the Bible that they approve, but the truth of it is they tell them, we will tell you what to believe. Their power base comes in knowing all of your sins through the confessional. Their power base comes through the idea that they say, unless what you do for God is done inside the mother church, unless what you do for God is done inside the mother church, you can never, ever, 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 ever expect to go to heaven. Never. Proverbs chapter 7, verse 7. Beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, because he wasn't reading his Bible, passing through the street near her corner. And he went in the way to her house in the, look at that word, twilight. Think about that for a minute. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. I want you to think now about something in Mecca that is black. Are you there yet? We're getting there. Okay? Something that's black in Mecca. I want you to think about that and what black represents in the Bible. Okay? Think about white and think about black. Think about the opposites and what they represent in the scriptures. Spoke of Mecca. What is it that's in Mecca? What is it that drives billions of people all over the world, mostly Arabs, mostly children of Ishmael? What drives them? What is so powerful there in Mecca? And remember, we talked about that her way represents darkness and blackness. What is it that's black inside of Mecca? It's called the Kaaba. In Islam, this is interesting. This is really, really interesting to me. There is no new thing under the sun, and everything matches the Bible. Islam has 5 pillars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Revelation chapter 9. The 5th trumpet sounds. The key comes down, and it's going to unlock the pit. What's been revealed, what's been concealed, is now going to be revealed. And Islam just happens to have 5 pillars, 5 laws. 5 laws, 5 books in the Old Testament called the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All 5 of them were written by the lawgiver Moses, and they describe the law of God, that if you cannot obey the law, then you'll die. And so Islam is like an image of that. They have 5 pillars. One of them is you have to bow down 5 times a day facing this black box, and you have to pray. And if you don't do that, you cannot go to paradise. You have to make what's called a Hajj. That's why all these people are here. They're making their Hajj, their pilgrimage. They must go to Mecca. I think it's at least once in their life. They must go to Mecca. They must compass the Kaaba, something that has a black veil over it, something that most people will never ever see the inside. Only like the elite of the Muslims, only like the elite of the Arabs, the rich ones, the high-ranking priests or whatever it is, only those guys can go inside and see what really is in there. And I'm going to show you some things that are in there. Now remember, Kaaba is a cube. Okay? It's not an oval. It's not anything. We'll get to the oval in a minute. The Kaaba is a cube. And then I saw that and I'm going, I've read something on that. So I checked with Manly Hall. He's dead now, but he wrote a book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And Manly Hall said, and Dan Brown spoke of that in the Lost Symbol too. It's how I remembered it. He said the cube basically it's a secret mystical symbol. Number 1, it represents a number. And it's not the number 4. It represents the number 6. That's how many sides it has on. This idea, that especially with gambling, okay, they throw the dice and your fortune is bound up inside of that cube with the number 6 on it. Someone took a video of inside the Kaaba. Notice that it's supported by 3 pillars. There was something else. As the camera panned around to one wall inside the Kaaba, there it is on the wall, a symbol of the sun, and underneath it, the symbol of the moon. Now, I want to stop right here because this is what I think is ironic. Muslims are very proud of the fact that they don't worship idols. Yeah, they do. The Kaaba is one big gigantic idol. And inside the Kaaba, the symbols of the sun and the moon, God said you'd be driven to worship them, and that's exactly what they do. Most people don't know it, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're worshiping the images of the sun and the images of the moon. And the sun and the moon represent polar opposites that are fused together, the male and the female, light and darkness, yin and yang, sons of God, daughters of men. That's what that symbolism is.
Okay, so we're back. We had to work through Mike Hogarth's little seminar there. It occurs to me at this point, even though he's doing his demonstration as a Bible preacher or a Baptist pastor, he's obviously has a lot of occult and Freemason knowledge. So he probably is a Freemason. And it occurs to me something that he it stands out to me that he was talking about when he talked about the fact that they would have to go, when Muslims go on their Hajj, they go around the Kaaba, the cube, which is, I think it's Arabic for cube, and they go around the large black Kaaba and they circle around it. And so that's interesting to me there. There's more Freemason or Freemasonic symbolism there, because there's the cube, and as they circle around it, you have together the circle and the square together. So I think that's a fascinating imagery. It's built into their religious ritual that isn't immediately apparent. And it goes back to the duality between the circle and the square, squaring the circle in a Freemasonic way,
and also goes back to the duality between dark and light, male and female, and occult symbolism. And as we're moving forward, we're going to try to expose the occult framework that's built within Islam that shows you that the ideological framework that was coming in at the moment of gestation and the Islamic formation of thought and religion would crystallize at its center a lot of biblical concepts. So we already know that Islam considers itself to be an extension of Abrahamic religion. It's within the Quran and the Surahs. It talks about Abraham, and it presupposes that the promise and the power of God went down to Ishmael and Ishmael's descendants. And so there's really the disagreement that we have between the Arab peoples who have Islam and the Jewish people who consider that the promise of God went to Isaac. And that's what it says in the biblical texts. So if you go to the Quran, it's going to say that the promise of God went to Ishmael, and it has a lot of the different background themes built into it. So it's relying heavily on the histories of the Septuagint and the Torah and the prevailing Hebraic Jewish religion that had been around for 1,000 years before Islam. Islam is really going to draw from whole cloth this idea that it's an extension or a continuation of the Abrahamic religion. And it tries to put Jesus Christ as a prophet, lesser than Muhammad, and it tries to take on this idea that Mary plays an important role within spirituality. So at a time before people even consider Mary to have a role, we understand that Roman religion venerates Mary with prayers and holy days, and considers her to be someone that you necessarily must rely on in order for salvation. So as we get into the 7th century and the conquering Arab armies decide that they are going to prop up this new religion, we can see that a lot of Augustinian monks in the area who are building monasteries are going to be having a great influence on Muhammad and his writings. And remember, Khadijah was Muhammad's wife when he was 21. I think she was 40, and she was said to be living inside of she was a nun inside of a Roman Catholic monastery. So you can see already that at the very outset, the very beginning of Islamic thought, we have this idea that they're drawing from the pieces of the religious mythology that's available at the time. So we're going to go ahead and listen to a really short clip here. A Muslim scholar is going to discuss the importance of Mary within the within the framework of the Quran and the Surahs, within their religious context. And in fact, Mary takes a more important role within Islam than it really does within Christianity. Later on, we know that the Pope would use his papal powers of pronunciation to elevate Mary as a mediatrix within Roman religion. And we all know that if you look at the rosary, that Mary is on the rosary, and if you follow the beads up, it's above the crucifix. So you follow the beads up, and Mary is there at the center of the necklace. And so you can see in many different ways that they're elevating the feminine divine role the way that it was in past prehistoric Babylonian and Egyptian cultism. So let's listen to this interesting clip here by this fellow, Gabriel Reynolds, and he's going to talk about the place of Mary within Islam.
The place of Mary in Islam is an important topic in part because it shows the connections between Islam and Christianity and some possible bridges in terms of spirituality and devotion. But there are also some distinctions between the two which are important to underline as well. So the first thing to say is that Mary has a prominent place in the Quran. Mary is actually spoken about more in the Quran than she is in the New Testament. There's an entire chapter of the 114 chapters or surahs in the Quran. Surah 19, is titled in Arabic Maryam, which is Mary, and it tells the story of the Annunciation essentially, and her devotion to God through that, and the miracles that take place when she gives birth to Jesus. Jesus is said to be able to have the gift of speech as an infant in that chapter. Surah 3 also tells the story of Mary, And it gives details not only of the Annunciation, which is found there in verse 45 of Surah 3, but also of Mary's own birth. So the figure of Anne, whom Christians know as Saint Anne, appears in the Quran. She's not referred to by name. In fact, the only woman referred to by name in the Quran is Mary. Her mother is referred to as the wife of Imran. But we have the story of how she dedicates the child that's in her womb to God. And later that child is found in a building called the Mihrab in Arabic, which is pretty clearly an allusion to the Jerusalem temple. In other words, the traditional story, again, not found in the New Testament, but in Christian tradition, of Mary being raised in the temple by Joachim and Anne is found or alluded to in the Quran. So, the founding scripture of Islam has a great interest in the figure of Mary. The place of Mary in Islamic religious life is diverse, and the different currents of Islam take different approaches to the figure of Mary. Within Sufi Islam and within many traditions of popular Islam, she's seen as a figure of great purity and also someone who can be asked for, at times, intercession in certain Marian shrines in places like Turkey, India, also Lebanon and Syria, Sednaya in Syria. Especially Muslim women will go to Marian shrines and pray there in the hope of especially of having a child.
So we can see here that Gabriel Reynolds, and it looks like he's out of the University of Notre Dame, has this really fascinating perspective. And it shows that Mary plays an integral, central theme within Islam. And that is important to know because it really inculcates within itself the actual predominant mythological archetype of the time. So in the 7th century, we're going to see that Roman Catholicism is having a huge influence across the world, and it's growing. The papacy has grown to the point that the Pope is a high priest over all Christianity. And at this point, these Gnostic ideas, these extra-biblical ideas, like the idea that Mary, the assumption of Mary, the idea that Mary was herself born of a virgin. So Mary's mother, Anne, Saint Anne, was somehow a virgin. These are not biblical concepts. These are not terminology or history that we get from the Bible, but they're really Gnostic scriptures that were written 300 or 400 years after the event of Christ. They were just fictitious, false gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas and the other Gnostic gospels out there, who are not considered to be part of the biblical lexicon. So we have to understand that these extra-biblical Gnostic concepts, like the Assumption of Mary and Mary's mother, who supposedly was named Anne, and all these ideas that were floating around within the Gnosticism of the Roman Catholic Church, are now being written into the Quran and the Surahs and the Islamic context, are being presented within the beginning fabric, within the beginning orchestration of Islamic religion as actual factual history. So you have these Gnostic terms and these Gnostic concepts being superimposed into Islam as if they're real history. And I think we have to understand that this is how we understand Islam, is to be an extension of the influence and the ideological framework of Roman Catholicism as it extended its influence over Muhammad and literally brought about the creation of the Islamic religious cultism. So this Islamic ritual was going to be designed by the power players who are the holders of the occult knowledge in Rome, and like we said, in Alexandria. Ultimately, the libraries of Alexandria in the city will be burned by Islamic armies later on, leaving, like we were discussing with Walter Vaith, leaving behind the city of Rome and its system of religio-cultic ritual was the last bastion of occult power left after Alexandria was burned. So it's beyond the scope of this particular episode to go all into the complete history of the religious mystery system, the religious mystery schools, the rituals of mystery that were brought out of Egypt and Babylon. But it's suffice to say that we're trying to establish the connection, the ideological inception point for Islam, and where the dogma and the mythology of Romanism was being inculcated across the world, and at the same time it was being introduced into the ideas. Now remember, Muhammad was illiterate, he couldn't read or write, so his wife Khadija, having been very wealthy and living in a monastery, a Roman Catholic monastery, probably built by the Augustinian monks, you can see that what was happening was that this power structure that was being built by conquest now had to have a religious backing or religious justification, and so they would just knit together the Quran and the Surahs and this Islamic doctrine into the background in order to give it this conquest, this Arabian conquest, a divine sanction, if you will. As we're going further and trying to make this point, we'll listen to some other Islamic apologetics. These are going to be Islamic scholars and teachers who are trying to convert us to Islam by showing us that within their doctrine and within their Quran and their surahs and in their texts are written in these ideas about Mary. It really reduces Jesus down to just kind of like a background figure and a lesser prophet, and it really uplifts Mary to this central role that Muslims and Muslim teachers and Muslim clerics and scholars are going to really revere Mary, even though they don't really have anything to say about Jesus. He's really going to play an important role within the Islamic text. Mary is referenced over and over and over again. And of course, this reiterates the point that we're making, that the actual ideological genesis of Islam is being taken from, not from the Hebraic scriptures, but from the practices, customs, and doctrines and dogma of the Roman Catholic hierarchy itself. So let's listen to this interesting little, basically it's an outreach, it's a religious outreach video that's trying to win you over to Islam, and it just can discuss Mary. So let's talk about it.
Christianity and Islam, the two dominating world religions, both believers in the same God, the same prophets, and all their miracles, but to what extent do they really coincide? Mary, the mother of Jesus, remains prominent and revered in both Islamic and Christian teachings. The great Virgin Lady, chosen by God to miraculously give birth to his messenger. Over the years, Imran and Hannah had grown old and were vow made by her mother. Zachariah built for Mary a room in the temple where she could live and serve in the way of Allah. Although women were restricted from entering the temple, she was brought up in the place of worship, where she was regularly visited by Prophet Zachariah.
Women were not allowed to stay at the place of worship and to be raised there, but this was given as an exception to Maryam. Again, a sign of her devotion, and also a sign that the people who were there at the time realized this was no ordinary woman. She was a chaste woman. Otherwise, I would not have let her to be raised in the place of worship.
Allah selectively appointed Mary. Her outstanding characteristics and unique personality distinguished her from all other women, and he found her worthy to carry his messenger.
It's really shocking to the Protestant mind that we're expected to believe that from the Quran that Mary is elevated, and that there's these further stories, extra biblical stories that are not described in our biblical texts, that describe Mary as having been lived in the temple, and there's all these further mythology and this further kind of constructing of Mary's profile within religion and building her up because she's going to have this miraculous virgin birth that we're expected to believe. We're expected to believe that virgins can give birth, and that Mary's mother also, Mary herself was given birth miraculously by her mother, and these miracles are not impossible for Allah at all, and that Mary is going to be made pregnant with Jesus, who is just a messenger who isn't really discussed. But the really profound thing is Mary's extra storyline that she's kind of that are built into the Quran. And so you can see that the evolving universal religious system that's coming about, it's trying to put together and unite Islam and Roman religion together into one system, is going to have to rely on Mary. Mary is going to become the central figure within religion, within both Islam and Roman religion. And when they're talking about the connection and the bridges between Christianity and Islam, we must understand that Mary plays a significant role within the dogma and the traditions of the Vatican. And for Bible-believing Christians, Baptist church believers, Christians in America, Mary plays no role whatsoever. And so she doesn't have a significant place within our prayer life, within our ritual, within our belief system. She's a woman who was a sinner, who required the salvation that was brought by her son. And he was born of her virginity because she wasn't married. That's the miracle. The miracle is in the fact that Jesus Christ has come to the earth to be the salvation of the world. And even though Islam, and in this context, the Vatican itself, through the creation of Islam, tries to downplay the role of Jesus Christ, tries to turn him into a secondary messenger, an unimportant factor, is really the dangerous part of this, because we have to understand that Jesus Christ came into the world as the Son of God and laid down his life for the salvation of the world, and that our understanding about the divine and about what God expects from us is to be informed by the teachings of Jesus Christ and not by the elaborations and the fallacy that Islam tries to build out in this mythology of Mary. So it's dangerous for people who are coming out of the Catholic Church, who really love the Marian shrines, who like to go to these special Marian, who see Marian apparitions, who want to have this this mystical spiritual experience, and they expect to see Mary appear to them and give them some kind of kernels of truth. And the nunneries within the Vatican, within the Catholic Church, are completely dedicated to praying to Mary. So it shouldn't be surprising that we find that Muslim women too go to these Marian shrines and pray. And so it's really a new idolatry. And it's really the old Babylonian system of goddess worship, where Semiramis and Nimrod played this dual role, male and female. And so you can see the rise of this Babylonian cultism, and it's really at the heart of the occult doctrine within Islam, and it's at the heart of the occult doctrine within the Vatican too, who have no real interest in the Jewish savior, the Jewish carpenter, the man of Nazareth. They don't have any interest in that. They really just want to keep their superstitious idolatry, their male and female cult, their occult duality of Nimrod and Semiramis. They want to keep that alive and in play. And they do that by allowing us to believe that the images that we're looking at are supposed to be Joseph or other, Mary or other biblical figures, when really they're just the age-old system of Roman idolatry and Greek idolatry that has drawn from the Egyptian and the Babylonian. So we just need to have a little more information. We need to have a little more information about what these systems of religio-cultic power really represent. And we have to understand that the Bible doesn't have a religious system. It's got 66 books. It's got histories and it's got learning to be studied, but it doesn't really have any imagery or any shrines. The Bible doesn't offer up any kind of idol or any kind of place, central city like in Mecca, no Kaaba within the Bible to circle around in order to have a religious practice that everyone can see. Okay, so the religious practice of Christianity is to be done in secret. You go into your room and into your inner closet and in the darkness there, and you pray and you do your religious work before the Lord where no one can see. So it's while this kind of profane religious doctrine that we see, it's an occult doctrine within Islam and within the Roman Vatican system of hierarchy there, we can see that it's an exoteric system that everyone's supposed to look and see. On Ash Wednesday, you get a little ash on your forehead, and you go in front of everyone and you pray, and you do these religious rituals that everyone can see. But within Christianity, these are esoteric practices that we do within the privacy of our own homes. We listened to some Muslim apologists and Muslim scholars discuss very briefly their ideas about Mary and their presuppositions about how the role she plays within the Islamic thought. So, as a Muslim, you can't question the Quran. It's just revealed truth, and you have to accept it or have your head cut off. So when you accept the Quran, you're accepting that those histories are all true, and anything that disagrees with those histories must be false. So, the presupposition here is that that Mary's mother can be known. We don't know her from history, but 7 centuries later, they say that Anne is Mary's mother. So these Muslims, they have to believe it. And so later on, now we're in the year 2020, and apologists for the Vatican are going to come into play, and they're going to use these Quranic verses to help buoy their position, to help be a bulwark in their belief that Mary is somehow part of the divinity, or that she is, worthy of prayer, that she's up in heaven receiving prayer and appearing on earth, and that she's somehow part of the Godhood, and that she's doing the work of God. So these are just really heresies and misunderstandings that are really carrying on down the line here through history. So as Bible believers, we understand that Mary is a really wonderful person, but she also died in her sins and required that her faith in Jesus Christ save her soul just like anyone else. In other words, she didn't have any special divine magic, even though the Vatican and now, since the 7th century, now the Muslims are telling us that she's a really important woman that we should all pray to her and revere. We have to understand that this is really a misunderstanding and a false doctrine. So let's go in here and let's see what this fella here, Scott, I can't remember his name. This fella is going to talk here. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Hey, this is Scott Smith, of the Scott Smith blog. Today we're going to be going over Our Lady of Fatima and Mary's special connection to Islam. So he doesn't believe it's going to happen through direct evangelization. He believes it's going to happen through a summoning of the Muslims to a veneration of the Mother of God. So wait a second. If Muslims won't convert because of Jesus, what makes us think that they'll convert because of the Blessed Mother? This brings us to the second part of this video, Mary in the Quran. Amazingly, Mary holds a very exalted place in the Quran. She is the only woman mentioned by name in the Quran at all. And she's mentioned over 70 times in the Quran. What's more, the Quran even names Mary explicitly as the greatest of all women of creation. Isn't that incredible? While Protestants have rejected a number of Marian doctrines, like the Immaculate Conception, the perpetual virginity of Mary, and the Assumption of Mary, Islam holds all these to be true. Amazingly, the Quran makes such a full-throated defense of Mary's virginity, the Quran actually blames all the bad stuff that happened to Jews because they did not believe in Mary's virginity. Interestingly, the Quran's likely not citing the New Testament when it talks about Mary. Instead, it's citing an apocryphal work of Mary's childhood. We know this partly because the Quran is quoting Saint Anne, the mother of Mary, and we only know that Anne and Joachim were the parents of Mary from this apocryphal work of Mary's childhood. The Quran cites Saint Anne as saying this: "O Lord, I vow and I consecrate to you what is already within me. Accept it for me."
All right, so we'll just stop it right there. And we can see here that the apologetics of both Islam and these Roman Catholic scholars, like this fellow right here, are converging on this center point. And the mystical revelation that we're supposed to take from all this is that somehow Mary and the Marian shrines and the power of Mary to break through all these different religious fields. What I take from it is that the Roman Catholic scholars were there at the very inception point when Islam was created, and they had a lot to say to Muhammad and to his followers about what should be in the Quran, and the fact that Mary has been written into the Quran so many times. And it speaks a lot here that they use these, what he calls apocryphal books, which are really just histories of Mary and Jesus that were written 300 or 400 or 500 years later, which are totally erroneous and are basically totally fiction. They took these apocryphal writings about Mary's mother, who they call Saint Anne, and they've written them into the Quran. And this should tell you right there, just like Walter Faith was discussing, that which one came first. Ultimately, this cult of Mary, this Marian worship, this elevating of Jesus' mother to the point of deity came from the Vatican, and then 6 centuries later was introduced and developed within the scriptures of the Quran, within the Islamic religion at the very beginning stages. And so later on, now 1,000, 2,000 years later, we're supposed to, some 1,400 years later, we're supposed to all believe that Mary and the power of Mary to, is central. So the Muslims can't accept Jesus, the Christians can't accept Muhammad, so everyone is supposed to converge and worship Mary. And she's really the real light of revelation here. And that's what we're going to find out when we start to dig in a little bit more into the doctrine of Freemasonry, that the hidden occult dynamic that's been coming up out of these secret traditions that's being externalized, this hierarchy that's being externalized, is really the cult of Mary, and that everyone should be praying to Mary. And these apparitions at Fatima and the interconnections between Islam and the Vatican are really coming back to the fact that they've been laid there at the foundation point, that these doctrines were laid within the foundation of Islam, and even having an entire book within the Quran called Mary. The title of the chapter is called Mary, should tell us that Mary was used incorrectly, and like I said, erroneously, to become a religious figure within Islam. As we go forward in history, we're going to find out that this groundwork has already been laid and the foundation has already been built for the connection and for the uniting of Islam and Roman Catholicism into a one-world religious system. And in order to make that point here, we're going to go a little bit farther with Professor Vaith, Walter J. Vaith, and he's discussing this very topic.
Building. Islamic dress. Well, you can look at old-fashioned Catholic nuns and you will find that the dress is identical. Catholic nuns wear the same dress as Islamic women of Orthodox faith. This is the great mosque in Damascus. Fascinatingly, inside the mosque, right inside, is this shrine, and there is a Muslim man praying at this shrine. Now, who's he praying to? Is it to Allah there? No. He's worshipping a relic of the dead. Because this is the shrine of none other than John the Baptist. Now, if you know something about Johannsenites, we've spoken about that, then you can already pick up, if you pick up the name John, you have Johansenism, then you have secret societies blended in the background. And they claim that this place has the head of John the Baptist. So an Islamic shrine in Damascus, this is, by the way, the oldest mosque, the most illustrious in that country, has this head. Fortunately, the Roman Catholic Church has a shrine with the arm of John the Baptist. I always say, if they carry on, they might be able to put him together again. I don't know. So, it is the same form behind the scenes. Inside the mosque, the women are not that important. They are relegated to the side. The men get the central positions. They are praying there with beads. In Catholicism, you pray with beads. You pray with rosaries. Now, which other religion has the priesthood just for men? The Roman Catholic Church is exactly the same.
Just pause Walter Vaith's interesting comments just for a minute, so that I can point out to you that during the time when Jesus Christ came and walked in Galilee and came into Jerusalem and was crucified by Roman soldiers, being falsely accused of all kinds of things. At that time, the Roman Senate was being controlled by, I believe it was either Augustus, or if he hadn't died, it was Tiberius Caesar. One of the Caesars was running the Roman Empire, and Pontius Pilate was there representing the authority of Caesar directly to control the region, to be the proconsul or the consul, to be the governor of the area, and he was there to effectuate Pax Romana, which is Roman peace, and he had no interest in allowing there to be some kind of uprising or to find out that there was a king of the Jews, a king of Israel, who was coming forth, who had great power to heal the blind and to raise the dead, and was this miraculous man who was popular with all the people, and was, for all intents and purposes, represented a real endangerment to Pontius Pilate's reign there as governor. And he could not allow there to be another king, another authority that the Jews could turn to. And on the other hand, the rabbinical council, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the men there, the rabbis who were running Jerusalem, who had their puppet king in Herod II, Herod the Tetrarch, they could not allow there to be anyone who would interrupt this peaceful and very economic, very financially advantageous relationship that they had with the Roman Empire. So they weren't really interested in breaking away or gaining their freedom from the Roman legions and this council, this Roman governor who was there to ostensibly take over the region. And this was happening very slowly and cautiously so that the people weren't in an uproar. But during that Passover year, they decided that they would get rid of this Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And he was crucified. And 3 days later, he was out of the grave, and the grave was empty. And this whole situation, this whole saga caused an absolute upheaval within Rome. Because the whole situation there, the history, the current contemporary events that were going on with Jesus Christ and his disciples were known throughout the empire. They were not something that were happening in a vacuum. People were aware that Jesus Christ, that this man from Galilee was there, and that he was changing the hearts and minds of the people, and that he was doing these great works. And when he was crucified, he was also well known. Obviously, it's 2020, we're still discussing it. So we have to understand that at that time, it was a face-off between the power and the authority of Rome to determine what people would believe. So you have the Roman pantheon of all the gods. So these are going to be all the different religious systems and all the cult practices from Egypt, from Pythagoras, all the different rituals and priestcrafts and different temples that you could imagine from all around the world. Every conquered territory under Rome had introduced the unique system of worship within this Roman pantheon. So if you were to have a state-sponsored, state-authorized religious practice under Rome, you were good to go. You paid your little, you accepted that this pantheon of Roman temples was there. They were all universal. They were all unified together under Caesar's law, and you were free to practice your religion under Roman law. And you were free to have Caesar as your king and your only rightful king. And it was against the law to have any other king but Caesar. That was the whole issue with Jesus Christ in the first place. These people had determined that they were going to try to catch Jesus Christ in between these politics, these religious, geopolitical nuances, and try to make him a victim of Roman tyranny and have him killed, because they knew that he could not accept Roman religion, and Jesus Christ himself could not accept the authority of Caesar. It wasn't going to happen. His followers weren't going to do it either. So it's the same dynamic today. Today we have a system of religious approved and Roman sanctioned accepted religious practice. And you can see the Vatican and the Pope get together with all the different religions of the world, but they don't accept Protestantism. They don't accept the Protestant Bible. They don't accept the Protestant doctrine about the Lord. They're willing to include Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists and Satanists and every different kind of tribesman and tribal animism, every different kind of practice in the world, but they will not accept that Jesus Christ is alone the only King of Kings, and that the Pope has absolutely no authority. So this is the same situation that Jesus Christ faced under the Caesars, and under Caesar's governor. Caesar's governor was there to enforce Roman law, to make sure that no one was practicing or accepting any religious system that Caesar didn't accept, or practicing any particular political belief that Caesar didn't approve of. And it's the same situation today. Today, the Pope is going to approve of all the different world's religions. They're going to try to make a universal one world religion and make peace with Islam and cause Mary to be this important figure within religious thinking, within the dogma of Roman Christian beliefs. And they're going to try to raise her up to be some kind of idol to be worshipped and prayed to. But they will not accept the authority of the scriptures in the Bible that point out that Islam is just a backwards and false religion, and that Roman practices and Roman traditions and doctrines are just fallen, backward, pagan, and wicked incantations and sorceries from Babylon, and we should not practice them. So today, just like in Rome, they have the empire, they have the legions, they have the governors, and they have all the armies, and they have all the gold, and they have all the seeming pretended authenticity of religious pomp and circumstance, but they don't have the little people out there who are still going to follow Jesus Christ. Even after all these centuries, even in 2020, we're still just going to follow Jesus Christ. We're going to reject the papal Caesar there in Rome, and we're going to reject all of his universal world religion, and we're going to reject Islam, and we're going to reject the idea that people should worship Mary, and we're going to reject Freemasonry and all their attempts to make a single system of authorized worship that discounts the Jewish Messiah, this carpenter from Galilee who was the Son of God, who paid the price for the sins of the world. These are just ideas that are just unacceptable to Freemasonry, unacceptable in the Vatican, and unacceptable in Islam. And these are the practices that we're going to have to hold to. We're going to have to hold to this faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. So, having said that, we'll get back here to discuss a little more with Eric John Phelps and Craig Szymanski are going to do a little discussion here about the whole subject matter. And we'll get back to Walter Veith some more. His seminars are expansive. They're hours and hours long. He does really an incredible exploration of some of these subject matters. So let's get on here and just listen to this discussion with Eric John Phelps and Craig Szymanski here.
Good morning and welcome to the Wednesday, June 9th, 2010 edition of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com, and today my guest is author Eric John Phelps, also radio broadcaster, and Eric has a website called VaticanAssassins.org. I recommend you go there if you want to learn the truth about the Jesuit order in America. And every time, like I said last week, when I had Eric, I'd have him back on for another appearance. Every time I want to get the juices flowing and understand really what the Jesuit order is all about, I call on Eric. And Eric, today, I just wanted to start out this way. I'm getting a lot of emails that are getting me a little bit angry that people just aren't getting it. The war on terror, Islam, all of this hatred that's being mounted against people, but no one really understands. There are people that do, but the majority of people just don't get it. When we tell them that terrorism was orchestrated here, the Muslim people are being used by the Vatican just like the American people, and this hatred is being whipped up to create a war to kill off the good people of both Christians and Muslims. And I wanted to set the record straight. Let's start out by saying this statement. I want you to prove to us, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the Vatican created Islam, and silence some of these email critics I get, because I'm getting tired of it. Go ahead.
Okay, if your listeners would like to go to my broadcast of the last two Fridays, the last previous Fridays, they can listen to Count Vittorio Vivaldi III out of Venice, who very well shows that Islam is a creation of the Vatican. And we also can see that the essential tenets of Islam are the exact same tenets of Romanism. Islam has jihads, Romanism has crusades. Islam has a central city, Mecca. Vatican has a papacy, Roman Catholicism has a central city in Rome. Islam counts beads. They have little beads that they count. So does Romanists. They have, it's very, very many identical things. I have 10 strong points that I've posted on the absolute similarity of Islam and Catholicism. And what the Count surprised me with was that he said that the papacy has always been in control of Islam. That's why Saladin was good to the people, allowed them to leave Jerusalem after he had conquered Jerusalem. And why he had killed 230 Knights of Malta and Knights Templars. He was killing these Knights Malta and Knights Templars because they were essentially enemies of the papacy. They wouldn't rule the kingdom of Jerusalem for the Pope. So Saladin killed 230 of them. I mean, if we go on and on, we can see, for example, the war in Serbia in the 1990s by Croatia and the Albanian Muslims. This is a continuation of using Islam to destroy the Orthodox Christian people. We see that when Constantinople was conquered in 1453, it falls, they behead the last Greek emperor, there, and the Second Rome, which Constantinople was called, falls to Islam, that creation of the papacy. So there are many, many, many evidences of it. Wherever Islam raises its sword, it always kills for the benefit of the Pope. They don't go and kill all the Roman Catholic people. They don't kill the Roman hierarchy. They kill non-papal Christians, the Orthodox, the Protestants, and Jews, as well as furthering the temporal power of the Pope.
Yeah, I'm just going to use a country as an example here because I was just checking it out the other day. I'm just going to talk about Morocco, and I'm going to bring it up for this reason. For example, here in America, we see a hidden agenda regarding how the ecumenical movement works, and basically how one day here you're going to have to worship the way the Pope wants you or forget about it. Now, behind the agenda, we have things like Waco, we have other things going on that make it pretty difficult for a biblical American to exist here in this country. But you still can do it openly, so to speak, unquote. Now, you go to a country like Morocco, and you find that, boy, if you start preaching Christianity there are laws against it. And that is all over the Muslim world. Now, tell us about why it's in place this way. I know you understand this quite well, but you'll find that Christians can't practice Christianity in a Muslim world, but here in America, we see that Muslims are welcome in open arms. I think it's to create some type of friction, don't you?
Of course, it creates friction, but it also prevents the preaching of the true gospel to the Arab peoples. Because we have to remember that there are only two racial peoples in the Bible that have biblical promises to inherit. The racial Hebrew Jewish Israelites and the racial sons of Ishmael, which we know today as the Arabs. And so therefore the papacy seeks to do its best to keep the true gospel from going to the Arab peoples, for which reason it created Islam in the first place, to kill out all the non-papal, Bible-believing Christians who are Arabs in Arabia and then North Africa. And so they continue with this quest. They don't want to have the gospel there, because if the gospel goes to the Arab people, they might begin to have prosperous civilizations and a middle class, and a people then that would rise up and say, listen, the papacy has always been our historical enemy.
Yeah, good point. And I wanted to mention this. Can you explain to us from your research how the papacy created Islam? Can you give us some historical facts? It's a huge subject, but just touch on some of the main points going back in history to lay a foundation for what we're saying.
According to the Count and according to ex-Jesuit Alberto Rivera, the Augustinians in North Africa tutored Muhammad. They taught him. And according to the Count, the Quran was written in Rome. Muhammad never wrote that. He never received it in a vision. And so therefore, Islam, and when you see this happening, then you can understand why Islam never persecuted the Augustinians, the North African Christians. Remember, Augustine was a pagan. The four primary theologians for Roman Catholicism, all of them considered some of the fathers of Roman Catholicism and the papacy, doctrinally. And the foremost is Augustine. Augustine hated the Jews. And so therefore, the Augustinians imbibed their hatred for Jews in a religion that they had created for Arabs, who are the natural enemies of the Jews, pursuant to the Bible. That the sons of Ishmael would always be against the sons of Isaac. And so they fashioned a religion for the Arab people to fit this biblical controversy between the sons of Isaac and the sons of Ishmael. And thus Islam never persecutes Roman Catholicism. In fact, Islam goes into in about the 8th century. And Islam goes into Spain, Portugal area, and it conquers the Visigoths. The Visigoths were non-Roman Catholic Christians. And after they used Islam to kill out the Visigoths or drive them over the Pyrenees into France, then the Vatican uses its military to drive the Muslims ultimately out of Spain, and by 1606 they're out. So we see many, many examples of Islam being used to destroy the enemies of the papacy. And why? Because Islam created it in North Africa by the Augustinians tutoring Muhammad. And one of Muhammad's wives had been a Roman Catholic nun.
Yeah, that's interesting when you look at his life. And now we're talking, what, in the 8th century now?
7th century.
7th century, okay. So, yeah, and when you start reading the Quran, you see so many similarities to Roman Catholicism, don't you?
I mean, it's a warlike religion, exactly as the papacy. It calls for the conversion of the infidel with the sword, just as Roman Catholicism calls for the conversion of the heretic with a sword, as Thomas Aquinas wrote in his Summa Theologica, and I have it quoted in my book. They're identical.
So now let's fast forward to 9/11, and you see throughout the 1960. I'd like to talk about that for a moment. Then we'll hit 9/11 because we've in a sense left it off the table on many radio shows, connecting the dots between how terrorism was orchestrated by the Jesuits. We hear about 9/11, and there's still constantly information coming out about really what happened. But
by the way, before I forget, I put a recent post up on my website on Tim Risser.
Okay.
And that relates to him implying that 9/11 was an inside job on June 1st, 2008. And 12 days later, he's dead.
Yeah, interesting. I was just talking about him with a friend the other day, too. Let's hold that thought and maybe touch on him in the second half hour, but I wanted to get back. Many people don't realize the Jesuit roots in Iraq and how they were kicked out of the country, I believe, in the late 1960s. I think we could start there and then move our way into how terrorism has been orchestrated and how these organizations have been fomented by Western money to create this controversy between the Muslims and Christians now that's going on in the world. Go ahead. Start in the 60s with the Jesuits in Iraq. Interesting.
Okay, let me go a little bit before that, Greg, if I can. When Muhammad died, there became a schism between the Muslim people as to who would be his successor. The ones that chose the successor to be Ali were the ones that were called then the Shia Muslims. And so we have this schism after the death of Muhammad between the Sunnis and the Shia. And they are mortal enemies one toward another. The Sunnis hate them and regard them as infidels. And so the Shia now, because the Shia are also really the enemies of the papacy, because the Sunni Islam was created by Rome. Shia Islam was not created by Rome. And so now we have this enemy of the papacy called Shia Islam. And even Suleiman the Magnificent fought against the Shia. Saladin fought against the Shia, according to the count. And so Shia are the target, because to have a unified Islam against the West, you have to neutralize the Shia peoples. Where do they live? They live in southern Lebanon, they live in Iraq, they live in Iran, they live in Afghanistan, and some of them live in, I believe, a portion of Somalia. That's only where the Shiites live. So, therefore, this crusade with, in 1960, we're going to 1960 now, the Jesuits had a very lovely university in Baghdad called Baghdad University. I believe it was the New York province, either the Maryland province or the New York province, that had established this Baghdad University in Iraq for the purpose, of course, training its leaders, and its leaders would then be subject to the papacy. In 1969, the Shia of Iraq expelled the Jesuit order from their country. Now that is
Why did they do that? Because they're meddling in politics like they do here?
That's right, because they were meddling in their politics. So the Shia wouldn't put up with it. So they kicked them out. And some of the leaders then went down in airplane crashes shortly after that. In 1971, the Jesuits bring the Ba'ath Party to power and put Saddam Hussein in power. And what does he do? He persecutes the Shia people of Iraq. He involves them in the Iraq-Iranian war so the Shia can mutually kill each other. And all of this is financed by the U.S. Jesuit-controlled government, because if you read a tremendous book called, I think it's called Spider's Web, it's The Illegal Army of Iraq by Friedman, he shows you during the Reagan administration for 8 years that his administration on both sides, Iraq and Iran, during the Iraq-Iranian war, because they want to kill off all the Shia.
And you see some pictures that are still floating around of Donald Rumsfeld seeming very friendly with Saddam Hussein as they're shaking hands and wondering, I'm wondering what they're talking about behind the scenes, but I guess we can fill in the gap here. They're probably, again, fomenting war there, correct?
Absolutely. The Shia peoples of Iraq and Iran have to be brought down in order to completely unify Islam. It's just like you have to completely bring down all Protestant sects. Just like this heretic we heard about at the news broadcast. You have to bring down all Protestant sects and submit them to the Pope by the National Council of Churches, World Council of Churches, and you got to do the same thing with the Orthodox. You got to subject the Orthodox Christian Church to the primacy of the Bishop of Bishops in Rome. They have the same principle applied to Islam. You must subject the Shia to the Pope of Rome, and since they won't submit, we have to kill them, and then they will submit to our Sunni leaders, and then our Sunni leaders will lead the way in the crusade against the West. So right now they are conducting a crusade against the Shia Muslims. We see this very same thing when Israel invades in 2006 into southern Lebanon. Of course, Hezbollah started it, but Hezbollah is run by the Knights of Malta. And the Knights of Malta run in Hezbollah with their hospital there in the border, according to the count, in southern Lebanon. They then recruit all the young Shia men to fight in Hezbollah, and then incite Israel to come and invade southern Lebanon, which they never won, and kill the Shia people. So it's a war on the Shia of all fronts. I believe when they detonate Detroit, there's the largest Shia Muslim population in the United States in Detroit. They're going to go up in smoke. It's all a crusade now against the Shia.
I want to talk about that, what you just said about Detroit. But first, just give us just a little bit of background. So we have the papacy creating Islam. How did this schism happen? Why did the Shiites rebel against the papacy? What was the main reason there that you found out?
As I perceive it, the papacy, being in control of Muhammad, wanted to continue its absolute control over Islam after his death with his successor that succeeded him, that was a Sunni. I can't remember his name right now. And with this Ali laying claim to being the descendant of Muhammad, the Muslims who followed him, they became what is called Shia. And this now was totally out of control of the papacy. The papacy now is losing control of this sect called the Shia through Ali. So the Jesuits now in control of the Jesuit papacy have to rid the Islam of this schism, so that Islam can be united for the purposes of the papacy. And one of those purposes is to be used against North America.
I think looking at, the Jesuits thrown out of Iraq, we have our domestic and foreign policy we see the ties between Spellman back in the Vietnam War, and we move our way into now this war on terror after communism falls, and that is orchestrated as well. But just for just a refresher course, people may not be able to get their mind around how our government, how the Jesuit order can create a terrorist organization that can work its way into America, do the damage they've done on 9/11, and then create this whole propaganda campaign that the people of Islam are all behind this, so that they can whip up a war between the two. So tell us how this is funded, how they can operate this way, how the Jesuit order really works behind the scenes, so that when people present this premise, they can back it up. Because most people in America still believe that the Jesuits have nothing to do with 9/11. Go ahead.
Okay, to begin with, we have to remember there weren't any Muslims on those airplanes. The airplanes were empty. Those airplanes were guided into the buildings by the military-industrial complex of this country. And as I've said for 10 years now, George J. Tenet, Knight of Malta, the DCI at the time, Director of Central Intelligence, a Roman Catholic, trained by Jesuits at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, he was the mastermind of 9/11. So therefore, this Knight of Malta, George J. Tenet, his master at the time then, was the head of the federal branch of the Knights of Malta, which at the time was Edward Cardinal Egan. Edward Cardinal Egan was the Archbishop of New York City. He's now been replaced by Timothy Dolan. And so Edward Cardinal Egan was the Darth Vader, was the overseer of the entire 9/11 scenario using his DCI George J. Tenet, just as Cardinal Spellman was the overseer of the assassination of JFK using his Knight of Malta DCI John McCone. It's the same system, but with different players. Now, with this 9/11 that they brought about, they then justified a crusade into Afghanistan in the following month. Afghanistan was invaded on October 7th, 2001. October 7th is a very important day in history because it's on October 7th, 1571, that the Battle of Lepanto was fought between the forces of Suleiman the Magnificent and the Holy Roman Emperor with his Knights of Malta and the Jesuits. And the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 is considered the most important sea battle in world history, second only to the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, when Octavian defeated Cleopatra's fleet and then went down to Egypt, killed her, and took over the kingdom. So this Battle of Lepanto is extremely important for the listeners to remember because on October 7th it took place, Suleiman was defeated, the Middle East was opened up to the Crusaders once again, and it's on this very same October 7th day that the U.S. invades Afghanistan. So they start the Crusade of 7th, 2001, against the Shia of Afghanistan, primarily. So that's kind of where it starts, and so now here we have it. And then the other thing I want to stress is that because the vast majority of white people in this country are ignorant as to these historical facts, they are successfully being herded into right-wing white Jesuit fascism. I just saw a guy emailed me a truck with a bumper sticker on it, and it has the Twin Towers burning. He said, I learned all that I need to know on 9/11. I learned all I need to know on Islam about 9/11. And there was a redneck somewhere down in the South somewhere. He had a Confederate flag, and he had this painted on the back of it. And I thought, this is exactly what they're doing. They're inciting these people, these white people primarily, to unite under a fascist resistance and fight this crusade because they refuse to believe that 9/11 was an inside job of this government.
Exactly. And then if we start really looking behind the scenes and looking at all the facts that prove that, we have to go one step farther and then decide, and try to uncover who was behind it and how they orchestrate these things. And that's where it's very important to begin to look at the Jesuit order behind the scenes, and all of their shenanigans throughout the course of history seems to be forgotten by the American people, and this is why they can get away with it. You make a fact in your book, Vatican Assassins, that they've been kicked out of over 80 countries in world history, and this is only since the 1530s when they were formed, correct?
From the 1540 to, about 1931, according to Jesuit Thomas Campbell, who was the former president of Fordham University, he lists 83 countries, cities, and states that they had been expelled from since their creation. But the other point I wanted to make was that the question is, well, what makes you think the Jesuit order did this if it's Cardinal Egan and the Knights of Malta? The point of my book is that the Jesuits have been in complete control of the papacy since no later than 1814, after their formal revival by a bull issued by Pope Paul VII. And in that bull, he gives them all their previous privileges and immunities, and in about 1886 or so, Pope Leo XIII was poisoned, and he was approached by a Jesuit and said, listen, you've been given a poison, but we only have the antidote. And he said, you will sign this bull, giving us all of our previous power back, and if you don't, you're going to die. If you do, we'll give you the antidote. And so Leo XIII signed the bull, he was given the antidote, and he lived.
Interesting, and so now we had the same thing going on. One thing I wanted to mention regarding Cardinal Spellman, when I interviewed a New York police detective who was working on a pedophile problem, his name was Jim Rothstein, he mentioned that it was well known that Spellman was considered to be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful man in America. And that is just carried on. In fact, okay, my guest is Eric John Phelps, author of Vatican Assassins. You can go to his website at vaticanassassins.org. You can buy that book if you haven't. And I tell you, it's well worth reading. A lot of facts in there that kind of put the puzzle together, because everybody wonders what's really going on in America, what's happening behind the scenes. Well, this is really what's happening, and the real clue is that you don't hear about it in the mainstream media. Yes, it's the things you don't hear about that really are causing the problems in America. And if you can cut the roots of the tree out, you might topple this evil tree that's been growing here in this country. We can talk about a number of things happening just today. We can look at the Gulf Coast. Eric, you mentioned terrorism on the threshold here, maybe in Detroit, but I wanted to just finish this up by talking about that recent flotilla, that peace flotilla that was going to Gaza, boarded by Israelis, and then this firefight began. How do you view that as the spark that's going to start off this huge conflict in the Middle East that's going to flow into this country? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think the spark that's going to cause it is when Israel attacks Iran, because that's going to happen. I believe the purpose for this whole flotilla fiasco, remembering, of course, that the Arabs have no right to Gaza. They only have a right outside the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and his physical descendants. And that doesn't include Gaza, that doesn't include the West Bank, and it doesn't include the Golan Heights. That's all Israeli, Jewish, Hebrew land, and they have no right to it whatsoever. So now, what they've done is they have created this agitation. It's the Pope's agitation. Remember, he's the one that's established Gaza. He's the one that's established West Bank. He's the one that wants to establish East Jerusalem for the Muslims. This is all from the papacy. Remembering the papacy always benefits from every dialectic, every conflict, every agitation that it creates. And so what they're doing is they are seeking to unite the Muslim world against Israel and against the U.S. And part of this unification involves the breaking away of Turkey out of the Turkey that was created by the Freemason and mass murderer Ataturk in 1922. Ataturk did away with Sharia law. And Turkey, after it had killed approximately 2 million Armenian non-papal Christians in the Armenian massacre, which Turkey denies to this day, by the way, all of killing them for the benefit of the papacy, because the papacy hates the Orthodox Armenians, and Islam wielded the sword to kill them. So Turkey is being driven out of its somewhat neutral position, as it had all the way through NATO, when it was the southern flank of NATO, and now through this Gulen movement, Fethullah Gulen, this man who is probably the most influential Muslim now in the world, who went into a voluntary exile in Pennsylvania here. So you know the Maryland provincial is allowing this Gulen leader to live here, and he has a protected compound up near the Poconos somewhere. And what they're doing is using this Gulen movement, they are driving Turkey into the anti-Jew camp. Israel did a lot of business with Turkey.
Now, this flotilla originated in Turkey, right?
Out of Turkey, that's right.
Yeah.
And the count tells me this is the Gulen movement. Well, this makes perfect sense, because the Gulen movement wants to unite Islam for the creation of the new caliphate in the Middle East, out of Baghdad, out of what used to be the center for the Ottoman Empire. And so what we have here is Turkey being pushed in this direction. Now all the Turks are boycotting Israel, exactly what the Pope wants. And this will also be another reason for the Pope to say, well, Turkey, you're not going to get in the European Union. The papacy has never wanted Turkey in the European Union, and it will never be. The only part of whatever was once Turkey was southern Cyprus, which is Greek Orthodox. They're in the EU, but northern Cyprus, which is Turkish, which was taken from the Greeks in 1974 by Henry Kissinger, is not in the EU. So this whole thing is to keep Turkey out of the EU. It is to unite Turkey on the side of the Islamic world that will be in league with Russia.
Mm-hmm. let's move over to the other borders in Mexico. Let's move over to Mexico and talk about what's happening there in your recent research. How is that movement also, the illegal alien situation, creating a weakness in that part of our country, in the West?
Okay, this has been designed by the Jesuit order to Catholicize our southwestern border since 1876. And this is documented by Richard W. Thompson in his great work, The Papacy and the Civil Power, written in 1876. And so with this Jesuit design of bringing all these lower-classed Mexicans into the country, the Jesuits in Mexico are making sure they're leaving, and the Jesuits here are making sure they're coming in. And the staging base for coming into the U.S. is the Jesuit stronghold of Arizona. And I posted something about this recently. There's called the San Xavier Mission near Nogales. It's not too far from the Mexican border. And this is where I believe the Jesuits, with their stronghold set up by Eusebio Kino, who is considered to be the father of the cattle country, the Jesuits are orchestrating this huge invasion through Arizona, and it will not stop. In fact, they've now incited more of this through a good piece of legislation that was signed by the governor there. But the Jesuits control her just like they control Arnold Schwarzenegger in California. The same Jesuit California provincial controls the California governor, the Arizona governor, the Hawaiian governor, and I believe the Nevada governor. He controls that particular region of his province. So what they've done is now they have brought in all these alien Catholic Mexican invaders, which are soldiers. They bring in their flag. They plant their flags at the post office, at the public schools, demanding this and that. They have no intention of being American. They want to reclaim the Southwest, claiming that it was taken from them illegally. And this is part of the Mecha Aslan rhetoric. So with this now, they have got the agitation with the Mexicans. Now they've got the agitation with the good bill that was passed by all the whites now being driven into their corner. And so now we have the perfect place now to have a race war. And when this race war starts, I maintain they're going to ignite the black on white race war. At the same time, they ignite the Latino on white race war. This will then drive all the whites to desperation. Adolf Hitler will come to power. Northcom, NORAD, Department of Homeland Security will spring into action. Blackwater will be with them, which is run by the Knights of Malta. And then they will come to the rescue and solve the problem. And here we'll have no constitution and be under martial law. And that's the purpose for the Mexican invasion. That's why Janet Napolitano doesn't want to stop. That's why George Bush didn't want to stop. That's why Barry Davis Obama didn't want to stop. It's absolutely necessary to bring America to fascist martial law to have this alien Mexican Roman Catholic and even Islamic invasion, because there are many Muslims there too.
Yeah, and they can use Arizona as a powder keg here by creating this type of strong legislation supposedly against illegal aliens.
Yeah, why didn't they do it 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Why didn't they do it 25 years ago when it's starting to happen? They waited until they have 40 million of them in the country. Now we'll pass this legislation. Now we can foment domestic insurrection and rebellion. And all the Mexicans you see, every last one of them is going to the concentration camps. That's why I tell you, Mexican people, you need to leave this country. You need to get back to Mexico as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you, what's your research centered on in the last weeks or so? What's been on your mind lately, and what have you been talking about on your radio show a lot?
I talked about George Allen, who was the past governor of Virginia. He was also a U.S. senator from Virginia. And what he did was, he was to be really the foremost Republican candidate against Obama. Well, he was credible. He did many good things. But he was given an order. And that order was to call an Eastern Indian who was born in Virginia, to call him a macaca. Now, macaca is like using the term nigger or something like that, to deliberately incite the listener, and he would then come under attack. He used the term macaca twice, deliberately. When he used this term macaca, then everybody came out and said, what are you doing using this name? And then it turns out that his mother was living in North Africa, and she had learned this term because this was the term used for the black Congolese during the days of King Leopold II, and it was also a term used for East Indians that come here called the macaca effect, that the East Indians take jobs that rightfully should be Americans. So when he used this term macaca twice on video, that completely caused him to lose the U.S. Senate race with, I believe the man was Mr. Webb, Greg Webb. And so the Democrat won the U.S. Senate seat for Virginia, one of them, and that threw a majority Democratic vote in the Senate so that they could pass what Obama-Biden wanted. The second thing is he was to be the presidential nominee for the Republican Party. In 2006, in December, he withdraws because of this term that he used, and now he's not really fit to run. And that ensured that they would have that decrepit loser John McCain that would ensure an Obama-Biden victory, at least in appearance. So I maintain this George Allen, and he now has what's called the Friends of George Allen. You can Google it. And it has 300 of the most powerful men you ever want to see. It's got Bill, and by the way, Bill Gates is funding the Gulen movement. It's got George W. Bush on there. It's got Carlucci, Frank C. Carlucci III, former Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Carlyle Group. It's got several billionaires, many senators, other big bankers. Verizon, the head of Verizon, who's a knight of Malta, Bruce Babico, I believe. It's got all these power brokers that are the friends of George Allen. What for? What for? Because I maintain George Allen, who is now some sort of an authority at the Reagan Memorial Library, that's where they nested him. They're waiting to bring him to power, or somebody like him, waiting in the wings to then unite all the white people into their fascist movement. Because all of these agitations have been deliberately caused to bring some supreme fascist dictator to power, white fascist dictator to power. By the way, he's a Protestant, so we'll make him a Protestant. So we can't really trace it to Rome, right? And then once he comes to power, then he'll implement all these Department of Homeland Security. Remembering, of course, that the Department of Homeland Security was created. It's a design by John C. Gannon. John C. Gannon is a knight of Malta. John C. Gannon was in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. John C. Gannon was an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. John C. Gannon is a Jesuit, and he created the Department of Homeland Security, which I call the Department of Homeland Security. So
go ahead.
So this is what I see with this George Allen, and that was an article that I worked on, and then I just finished one on Tim Russert yesterday.
Yeah, I want to touch on Russert, but first just let me mention this. When you're doing your research out there, listeners, start at Georgetown. Start looking at a guy named Edmund Walsh, or Father Edmund Walsh, and then go to Eric's book and start putting the dots together regarding all the people that have followed that man and the connections to them. You're going to be astounded how powerful these people are behind the scenes, and how no one in America knows about it, and the news media doesn't want to cover it, and the reason is they protect Rome as well, and they protect the Knights of Malta because many of the top media people are involved in the same organizations, right, Eric?
That's right. Henry Luce, the father of the Gannett newspapers and Time Life, he's a Knight of Malta. Cardinal Spellman's intimate friend. Remember, the press center of this country is Rockefeller Center, across the street from St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. The CIA is there, the CFR is there, and whatever comes out of that's run by the Knights of Malta and is facilitating the purposes of the papacy, which is headquartered at St. Patrick's Cathedral, where the Knights of Malta are headquartered. So that is how we understand that. Jesuit Edmund Walsh, he himself was a Knight of Malta.
Yeah.
So they're organizing the press, and they're orchestrating everything, and anybody that gets in their way, like Tim Russert, who was trained by Jesuit at Canisius High School in Buffalo, New York. He was trained by Jesuits at John Carroll University in Cleveland. who was the personal gopher, the helper for Patrick Moynihan, that Jesuit, that U.S. senator out of New York, who was a Fordham visiting lecturer, and he was also part of the cover-up in the JFK assassination. Tim Russert was absolutely in the Jesuit order's back pocket. They made him and created him, but when he started to go against the story of 9/11, and when he started to infer that it was an inside job on June 1st, 2008, when he was interviewing McClellan, the Bush's White House press secretary, 12 days later he was dead.
Right, and let's fill in those 12 days. Now we know that Russert also was one. He was a Meet the Press Sunday broadcaster, right? He had a big show. I'm not sure if it was Meet the Press. It was one of those Sunday shows.
Meet the Press.
Yeah, and so he was a very high profile figure in the media, working for NBC. Comes out of Jesuit University, has ties to Moynihan, like you said. And then begins to look into 9/11 and starts to get those broadcasts out about the possibility of it being an inside job. But he also starts interviewing Bush and Kerry regarding their skull and bones connections.
That's right.
And and on this radio station, you hear his voice most every day. Is saying over and over again, well, what does that mean for America? And Bush says, I have whatever Bush says. So he then, after that occurs, now he's talking about 9/11 as an inside job. He takes a trip to Rome. Unbeknownst to many people, he was in Rome just prior to his heart attack.
Right.
Supposedly, I believe at his son's graduation or something, but fill in the dots there for us.
Yeah, it was a celebration for his son's graduation from Boston College, Jesuit Boston College, probably the second most powerful and largest Jesuit university in the country. And he was there for a celebration, and what does he do? He has an audience with Pope Benedict XVI. He leaves Rome, he comes back to the U.S., and his wife and his son stay in Rome. I find that intriguing.
I find that very interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then not long after, he supposedly collapsed on the floor at NBC News there, which appears to me that he is in cup. And that's pursuant to the Jesuit oath of the Fourth Vow.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave him a cup of coffee, and that was his last cup of coffee.
And strange things, no autopsy, right?
No autopsy. I have a whole list of anomalies on my site there for review. There's no autopsy. We don't even know the doctor's name who gave the autopsy. So it's a complete cover-up in his murder, and nobody's talking about it. And obviously the Jesuit hand's in it because he attacked the Iraqi war. He didn't want the war in Iraq. He mentioned or tried to lead on with the idea that it was a inside job of 9/11. Remember, they got rid of Lou Dobbs. They fired him. They got rid of Montel Williams because of his position on the Iraqi war. All these people that are against the Iraqi war and maintaining that 9/11 is an inside job have no voice whatsoever in the national press, and some of them are relieved and others will be killed.
Right, and this shows you they'll kill their own because they created Russert, then thought he was a loose cannon. They had to get rid of him, right?
That's right, just like Kennedy.
And then if you look at all the reports, they eulogize him as if he was such a great man, and as if he was always. They start talking about his strong Catholic roots and how he loved the papacy.
Right. And the other thing. Yeah, and the other thing now just occurred to me is that if anybody starts to get on the thought that he was murdered, why, it was Skull and Bones that did it. Not Protestant operation. They did it. It wasn't the Jesuits. Mm-hmm. Failing to realize that the Jesuit William F. Buckley was Skull and Bones, not a Malta, and a host of other member of knighthoods.
Yeah, I mean, that opens up the door to, we don't have time, another show, we'll get into it again, the connection between Freemasonry and the papacy, and how they use Freemasonry as basically the Protestant arm in this country. Just in 30 seconds, how important is that?
Very important. That'll open up a lot of understanding, like J. Edgar Hoover.